Hi guys, welcome back to Rue Morgue TV. I am Rue Morgue Executive Editor Andrea Subissati, and in this episode we have yet another Q&A from Frightmare in the Falls presented by Rue Morgue. This is my Q&A with Scream Queen Adrienne Barbeau. Enjoy. So, hi everybody, and welcome. I am Andrea Subissati. I am editor of Rue Morgue magazine, and if you're not aware, being editor means it's my right and privilege to cherry pick the greatest Q&As and panels at a convention that we're throwing. So it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce you to Miss Adrienne Barbeau. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Adrienne, you've had such an epic career, and you've made so many convention appearances, and I've racked my brain to try and come up with questions that you don't get asked all the time and time again. But these guys have some questions for you as well.
Okay.
We'll be sure to make time for them. But I want to start out. You worked alongside Bea Arthur on Maude, and it was a very cutting-edge 1970s feminist drama, comedy drama, and can you tell us one important lesson you took from your experience working on that show that has endured throughout your career? They're all like that, all my questions. I don't fuck around.
Maude, you're a crass materialist.
Right, and you're going to profit by it.
I don't know if it was a lesson that I learned there or that was supported there, but Bea was one of the most professional actors I'd ever worked with. I took it for granted at the time because I hadn't worked with anyone who wasn't. And then when I went on in my television career, I began to realize how fortunate I was to have worked with someone who was, not only was she professional, she was extremely giving as an actor. We would have a table read, reading the script that we were going to do the following week so that the writers could go back and touch it up and everything. And Bea was always the first one to say, you know, this line might be funnier if Adie said it or if Conrad said it or something like that. She was very giving in that way. She was the first one out of her chair to go to the door and greet any visiting actors that we might have. And years later, being a visiting actor on another set, I realized how special that was, because a lot of times you walk in and you sit down and you start doing the work and you don't meet anybody, you don't know anybody. They've all been together. And she was the first one in the rehearsal hall and the last one to leave. So I guess what I'm saying is, I mean, I would like to think that I was professional before I went in, but I certainly learned the value of showing up and doing the work and caring so much about it that it was the important thing.
Okay. Yeah, well, I can tell you that that's something we know about you is your warmth and your how much you give to your fans. So that might be something as well. Now, Hollywood is notorious for typecasting actresses, which isn't news to you. And you've been typecast as both a dramatic feminist actress in your career as well as a sex symbol. So I want to ask you, which was more stigmatizing to your career?
I don't feel I ever experienced any kind of a stigma. Maybe I was typecast, or I had labels put on me right from the beginning, because I started as a musical fiddler. So when I ended up in L.A., you know, I was first perceived as a stage actress. And then because my first L.A. job, or television job, was Maude, which was a half-hour sitcom, I was then a comedienne and couldn't get seen to do drama. I think I was hired for a Quincy, if anybody is old enough to remember Quincy. And I played a dramatic role there, a woman who had been raped. And so then suddenly, okay, so she can do drama, she can do comedy. She's a TV actress. But in 1978, feature producers did not think that anyone would pay to see a television actor on the big screen. So, you know, no movies were coming my way because she's on TV. And it was because I did a television film with John Carpenter which is how we met, called Someone's Watching Me. Yeah. Called Someone's Watching Me. And then John and I got together as a couple, and he wrote The Fog and said, would you be in it? And I said, oh, it's a ghost story? I mean, this was the height of the women's movement. I was championing coming home and, what were some of the other, I thought he was going to write I wanted to make a movie about socially significant episodes, like we had been doing on Maude. But then I read it, and I said, yeah, I'd love to do this. And so The Fog was my first feature film. And I think in part because I was married to John by that time, and in part because The Fog was a horror film, or a fantasy, or whatever you call it, ghost film, that then the label came, she does genre movies. They didn't even say genre in those days. She does horror movies, or she's a scream queen. But it hasn't followed me all the way through. I ended up doing, comedies and Back to School and Cannonball Run and a lot of stuff that, God forbid, anybody should see, which I took for various reasons. And if you want to know, you can buy my memoir, And then you ask about the sex symbol. I remember somebody said to me, Adrienne was worried about her acting ability in Cannonball Run. Don't you realize all the ability you needed for that movie was between your down your chest. I don't remember how he said it, down your breastbone or something, It's like, it took me a while to realize that people were responding to the character in Maude because of the way she walked down the stairs. I mean, I wanted to be a good actress, and I wanted to get the jokes, But you know what? Whatever works. I just wanted to show up and do good work, and
so you did.
I certainly never minded. I mean, it was fine with me.
Yep, the shoe fits. If the bra fits. So you've admitted to not being the biggest horror and sci-fi fan.
Oh, yes.
In spite of being in some of the greatest horror and sci-fi movies. What is it that you look for in a role specifically, or generally?
Ahoy, mateys. This is KAB Antonio Bay. Stevie Wayne here, beaming a signal across the sea. To the men of the seagrass, 15 miles out tonight, a warm hello, and keep a watch out for that fog bank heading in from the east. Now, in the meantime, relax with me while I play this song from the Coupe de Villes, dedicated just to you.
Boy, would I like to meet her.
I'll tell you what I look for in a horror script is character and character development and believability and logic, which I don't find all the time. I can't tell you how many scripts I've been offered where, by page 3, 6 people have been killed in the most gruesome way, and you don't know who they are, and you don't care, and and I'm not going to read that one. But what do I just know it when I see it. I just finished doing a year traveling with the National Company of Pippin. I had no interest in getting back on stage, really, but then when a role comes along for someone my age, where I'm hanging from a trapeze.
Are you guys familiar with this? This is like Cirque du Soleil musical theater. It's crazy.
Yes, yeah. In fact, we used a lot of people from Canada, from Cirque du Soleil, and from Les Sept Doigts de la Main. But I was asked to play Pippin's grandmother, and she sings. But she sings it doing a trapeze act and hanging upside down, and I thought, yeah, I'll do this. Let me get back on stage. So I loved Ruthie in Carnival.
Oh, I love that show so much.
Yes.
What on earth would it take to get that back on the air? Because whatever it is,
I don't know.
Name it.
Never going to happen, I don't think. I can't imagine. But there are not too many times you get offered a role like that for a woman of my age, Usually it's, you're going to play the judge, or you're going to play the nurse, or maybe you'll play a lawyer. But here is a woman who's a snake dancer who. So I guess I don't know. I guess I look for women with morality too.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I loved about Maggie in Escape. Her entire moral compass is there in that last scene when she reaches her hand out to take the gun.
Yeah.
I just know it when I see it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, but believe me, I mean, I've taken many things just because I had termites and I had to tent the roof, and
That's fine.
And I've got 2 boys in college still.
Hey, no shame in working.
You got to pay the
You got to pay the bills. You got to pay tuition. Exactly. Now, I've heard, because I think from the outside, women in the horror genre are always assumed to be the victims of something, victims of someone, even if they persevere and survive in the end. So is victimhood in the eye of the beholder, would you say?
Oh, God, Henry, what's wrong now?
Not a thing, Wilma. Everything's just fine.
My grandmother came over from Armenia right before the first genocide, and I have a lot of relatives who survived the genocide, and I think, and most of the women in my Armenian side of the family were just very strong women who took care of business, and so I think that sort of filtered down and. Get up and do something.
Right. You have never played a victim because you would never see them as victims. You choose roles, I think. I'm going to answer your question for you. I think you choose roles, women who aren't going to take anything lying down.
Probably so. Probably so.
Now, you've had so many roles written for you, which is something that's so fascinating to me. I think if somebody said, I wrote this role for you, I'd be going through that role with fine-tooth comb, and as soon as that person did something shitty, I'd take it so personally. In your opinion, do these roles best reflect your acting abilities, or do they more correspond to your personal ethics and moral codes?
No, I think it's acting, because what I say to myself is, she wouldn't do that in that situation.
Okay.
And that goes all the way back to Maude. I mean, they wrote for us, but and especially in those days when we were again talking about political bombshell issues. We were talking about women's issues and everything. Right. I'm sure there were times when they had Carol saying something, and I'd say, you know what? That doesn't feel like Carol. Right. That may not be me, but in her situation, I think she would not respond that way. Okay. So maybe I learned it around the writers' table in a sitcom.
Carol, are you having an affair?
Just leave me alone, Mother.
Were many of the writers women? Like, was it challenging to stand up like that?
No, it was no. They wanted that from us.
Yeah.
They wanted that from us. That was the atmosphere for Maude, certainly. Norman Lear and the woman who wrote the two-part abortion episode was written by Susan Harris, who then went on to write Golden Girls, I think, didn't she? Yeah. We didn't have any women on staff, I don't believe, in the 70s, but we did get a lot of scripts delivered from outside, from women who were not on the staff. But no, it comes down to how I feel the character would respond in a certain situation, not how Adrienne would respond.
Okay. And have you ever lost that battle on a particular set, in a particular role? Super specific?
I can't think of anything. If I have, it's been, and I've never thought of it as a battle, certainly. I've just gone and said to the director, I don't understand why she's saying this. If she did this, or, doesn't this make more sense? And sometimes it's resulted in a complete rewriting of a scene, because he'll say, I didn't think of that, or whatever. Or he'll say, no, it's because of this and this and this. Oh, okay, fine. I can do it with that understanding now.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, in addition to your 2006 memoir, you've also written some fiction, the Vampires of Hollywood series. And vampires in literature are often used as a metaphor for some other kind of cannibalistic, draining force. You see where I'm going with this. Not in yours?
Not in mine.
There's no metaphor. There's nothing going on in Hollywood that maybe sucks the life out of things?
Oh, I never thought it like that.
Not putting words in your mouth.
There's plenty going on in Hollywood that I tried to put into the book in a humorous way, whether we're talking about agents or lawyers and things. But no, not in terms of sucking the life force out of anything. I had no political agenda. I was just trying to write sort of a funny vampire detective novel. Yes. And in fact, I doubt that they had me in mind or anyone like me in mind at all, because the breakdown was a wizened, I don't know if they said, I'm sure they didn't have an age, but she was a wizened old woman, snake dancer or whatever, I can't remember. And I actually probably got the audition because I knew one of the producers, and he said, oh, yeah, we'll get you in, And so I went in. They just said they're carny workers. And I had one scene, which was the scene, it was a little rewritten in the pilot, but it's the scene around the funeral where Ruthie is saying, I don't know this woman, God, but blah, blah, blah. And so I went in my old cowboy boots and my jeans, the way I always dress, and I had a wig that I had used for a movie called The Convent that had gray in it and was sort of long, because obviously this woman isn't coiffed. But I didn't know how to put it on, so I took it to a hairdresser, and I said, could you put this on for me? And, okay, fine, and she put it on, and I never looked at it. And I walked into the audition and went into the ladies' room to get myself together, and I looked, and I had this huge thing on the top of my head. She had put it so far back, it just looked ridiculous, and this hair was coming in. What you going to do? So I went in, and I did the audition. They had me do it once, and then the director, Rodrigo Garcia, gave me some adjustment. And then they asked me if I had any difficulty working with snakes, and I said no. I'd worked with rats and tarantulas, and as long as it wasn't cockroaches, I wasn't going to do E.G. Marshall in Creepshow. And I came out, and the casting director said, that was fantastic. I said, really? I said, I was really nervous because my hair, I'd never worn a wig. He said, that's a wig? I wouldn't have known. And that was it. It was before Thanksgiving. I never heard another word until maybe a week before Christmas. And then they called and said, well, don't tell anybody yet, but we're making the offer to you. The reason you feel like it was written for me is that after I was cast, and I think they did this with many of us in the show, and they knew what they had, then they incorporated that into Ruthie. Then she became more, maybe more, yeah. Interesting, I'll have to ask him. We just did another movie together, so I think I'll be seeing him at some premiere or another, but I didn't know that. The problem with Swamp Thing, and maybe this is the reason he didn't, is that they were very under-budgeted, and they kept cutting the budget as we were doing it. So Wes had to make a lot of changes as we were going on. He started with this wonderful script. It was just a gem of a script. And he was having to pull entire scenes and eliminate actors. And it was, the fact that it came out as good as it did was a real tribute to him, because
I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on why that fell through.
It was just a breakdown in negotiations. They just, the director thought I was already cast, and he was sending the script and everything. I said, wait a minute, we don't, they haven't contacted the agency. And it just, it went right down to the wire, and suddenly it just,
From feminism to Rodney Dangerfield in one breath.
I showed up, and there was this line of women outside his trailer. And I said to the producer, what's that? He said, they're groupies. They think he's the sexiest man alive. Well, okay, Rodney. He was great. I mean, he was great fun, and he was a sweetheart. I don't know if he ever stood still through the entire filming. And I always said the director should have had an Academy Award just for getting him to say the lines on the page, because Rodney wanted to do his act, And Alan, the director, was always saying, Rodney, that's great, it's really funny. I don't think it works in this scene, But he was a sweetheart. I had a good time with him. And he has since, he's passed, but his wife just set up a... what would you call it? It's a school of comedy at Los Angeles City College. He has, I don't know what the word is, he's donated money to establish this entire school of comedy. I think they've started with 4 classes for a college degree. The Rodney Dangerfield something. He endowed the school with money to
He'd
do
make
that.
such a dirty joke that you just used that word.
What, endowed?
I wish I could think of it. I wish he could just take me over
Well, it'd
right
be
now.
something about not getting any respect because
Exactly.
he wasn't, or something. I don't know. It was not. I was fortunate, we all were very fortunate, to have an incredible booth director who made all the difference, jumping off of a building, and she goes running off, and she lands, and she goes... Then I've got Andrea Romano, coming from the booth director. But it's great fun, and it's. I don't think it's any more difficult. I don't have to get dressed. I don't have to get my hair done. I don't have to put makeup on, and it's just fun.
I'm glad you asked about the voice acting, because I was thinking about that when you were talking earlier, that it wasn't so much your typecasting that was affecting you as the switch from format to format, from TV to movies, whereas now you've done almost everything with video games and voiceovers. Can you speak to crossing those boundaries?
When I first started doing voiceovers, I was approached by a voiceover agent who had heard me on $20,000 Pyramid and called and said, I think you've got a great voice for doing. And that would have been after The Fog. Mm-hmm. And so, she just started submitting me for, I started out doing voiceover commercials.
Right.
And there was some animation, and went and studied animation with the woman who ended up being the booth director for Catwoman, because there's a technique for just acting with your voice. But in those days, there were very few celebrities or people in the public eye who were doing voiceovers. Mm-hmm. It was sort of, I guess, considered, now, my God, the fastest way to have a voiceover career is to have a huge filmmaking career or television career. Uh-huh. In terms of the other crossovers...
This is the video games is what I'm thinking of.
Oh, video games.
How many of you picked her up in Mad Max?
Mad Max, Pink Eye in Mad Max.
Barbeau.
Dr. Tilson in Halo 4.
Uh-huh.
Wants it bad. You don't think you can remove... It can't leave the station. You know that, right?
We don't have any choice, Doctor.
It's not a matter of choice. It took 3 months, and the biggest starship the UNSC could throw at it just to relocate it here. Unless you're a lot stronger than you look. It's not going anywhere.
Halo 4 was my first experience with motion capture. And then again, that is a different experience than just doing VO because you have to memorize everything, and they put you in the suit
with the dots, right?
The suit with the dots, and you act. Then you don't get a lot of direction, but they want to see your body movements and things like that. So you're sort of flying by the seat of your pants. But even at that, I didn't know the full scope of the role until I showed up to do the job.
Okay.
And actually, I did do one, God forbid, that I probably never would have done had I known. I mean, well, I don't know. I did a video game called Hitman, and when I showed up, they just wanted me to ad-lib the vilest dialogue I could think of. And I mean, I went for it. It was pretty vile. It was pretty vile.
Vile in what way?
I don't. I just remember something about bloody tampons, and it was just like, I don't know. Has anybody ever seen that episode of it? Do you know which one I mean? Am I in there? Is it as vile as I remember doing? Did they cut it down?
Going to be Googling that.
I guess my morality doesn't extend to video games.
Everyone's got a sense of humor. Is there another question over here? I thought yeah. Hi.
Well, we had a wonderful time doing The Fog because we were a family. I mean, it was Tom Atkins is one of my closest friends. John had his crew that had all become my friends because of our marriage. We were in the most beautiful part of the country that you could imagine. I loved the role. It was just a happy, wonderful experience. So Stevie stands out in that way. I had a great time doing Creepshow. Oh. I loved George, loved his wife at the time, Chris Romero.
Wilma.
Loved Pittsburgh, spent my days off antiquing. And because she was so outrageous. It was great fun for me. I took this film because it was shooting in Moscow, and I'd always wanted to go to Moscow. And this was in 1994. And it was supposed to be me and 50 trained rats doing a horror film in Moscow. And when I landed, a rebel faction of the government had just fired on their White House. And the producer took me to my apartment and said, well, you stay here. We have civil war. I don't know what's going on. Maybe we don't make this movie. Maybe you don't go home. And they were firing. I could see them out the window of my apartment. But we did make the movie. I can't begin to tell you what went on. I will tell you that I was supposed to work with 50 trained rats, and the Russian trainer, prop woman, assured me that they were not gutter rats, they were trained rats. Well, all they were trained to do was eat anything that smelled like fish. And only 30 of them showed up. There weren't 50. And of the 30, 16 were dead. So every time we did a scene, the prop master had to move the dead ones around to make it look like they were still working. And every time we did a scene where the rats had to swarm on me, the only thing they were trained to do was eat anything that smelled like fish. So they took fish heads and they squeezed them all over my gown. So the rats would swarm on me. And it just went from there on. I mean, we had, sets catching fire and nobody speaks English and I'm yelling fire and everybody, and the director is having a shit fit, excuse my language, because nobody speaks English. And we're out in the middle of this, it seemed like the Siberian steppes. It wasn't, but we're out in the middle of some forest. And the only way I can go to the bathroom is to go out into the trees with a copy of Pravda, and it was an experience. Because 5 of our crew got stuck in the snow, and one of the guys ended up with frostbite because nobody got to him for 24 hours. We didn't have heat in the trailer. My trailer had heat, so I was inviting everybody in, but nobody else had heat. It was, again, that was not an easy one.
So it's anecdotes like that that inspired your memoir, did it not?
Yes, yeah.
Now,
the memoir is a series of stories, pieces about making the movies, being married to John, dating Bert, doing Cannonball Run, things like that. Yeah.
Now, I get the sense that you're very candid, but you're also very reluctant to speak ill of anyone.
Well, I don't, aside from one of our political figures, I don't have a lot of ill will toward anyone. I've been very fortunate in my career. I would say that there are maybe less than a half a dozen people that I have worked with that I would not want to work with again, or that I don't have good feelings about. But I tend to be fairly understanding and forgiving.
For a career like yours, less than 6 is tremendous.
That's a less than, yeah, that's...
Been very lucky. And I realize that you don't identify as a big horror fan, but in case there are any aspiring horror actresses or scream queens in the room watching us on Rue Morgue TV right now, women who want to get into Hollywood and want to get into the genre, but who are watching this mess of politics and watching Time's Up unfurl, what's one piece of advice you would give to them?
Just genre people who want to get into the horror film?
Hollywood.
Oh, Hollywood.
Hollywood hopefuls.
Learn your craft, I think. Learn yourself. I'm a big believer in whatever it takes to get a real understanding of yourself so that you can then expose that to other people, whether it's therapy or meditation or church or whatever it is, so that you understand. Because oftentimes I have seen actors come into auditions, they're bringing something in. They don't even know they're bringing it in. Maybe they just had an argument with somebody outside. Maybe they don't feel like they should have to audition for this role. It should just be offered to them or whatever, and they bring that in, and that shows up on the camera, and they don't get the job. So the more you know about yourself, the more you know what your strengths are as a person, and then they become your strengths as an actor. I think that's important. But really, learn your craft.
I love that. We'll take it. And Adrienne, you're at your table all weekend?
All weekend.
All weekend.
All weekend.
Come see her.
I'm going to say one other thing.
Do it.
B has been quoted, I don't know, maybe B and I were having a conversation. I don't know where I ever heard it, if it was between the two of us or she just said it to somebody else or whatever, but somebody asked her, why are you such a good actress, or how do you act, or whatever. She said, you just say the words like you mean them. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense to me.
There you have it.
I think you have to have an understanding of the character so that then you know how the character will say those words.
There you got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.